Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
This Eruvin Daf test contains three primary discussions. The first one is continuing the halachos of how you install a beam, a cross beam, in order to make it permitted to carry within a mavoi. And the next two discuss if you're not using a cross beam for that, but you're using a side post, a lechi, and how you install that. So the three discussions are as follows. First of all, does the cross beam have to be over the tops of the walls? Does it have to go across the corners, or could it be suspended in front of the walls? And then about the lechi, the question is, are you allowed to carry directly next to the lechi, or only past the lechi? And the third issue is, what happens when your lechi is only visible either from the inside or from the outside of the mavoi because it's flush against the wall from one perspective, but not flush from the other perspective? Does that count or not? So first of all, we're discussing the kaira, the crossbeam, and we had a shaila recently on the daf, the end of daf ches, and Rava had said that you cannot put the crossbeam attached to the front of the walls of the mavoi. It has to go over the top of the walls of the mavoi. Let's remember that a mavoi is a long, narrow alley or street. It's surrounded by walls on three sides that have entrances to courtyards branching off in the walls. And there's usually at one end of the long, narrow mavoi, there's usually an opening that leads out to Rishus Harabim. That means that opening, as you're walking into the opening, you have two quarters of walls, of courtyard walls on either side. So the crossbeam's got to go across the top of the mavoi, and Rav had said it's got to go across the top of the walls. It can't be attached to the front of the walls, even if it's very high up. So Gemara has a question on that from a brisa. The brisa says if you have a crossbeam, which is either meshucha or teluya. So the Gemara understands that teluya means hanging. That means that the crossbeam doesn't reach all the way to the walls. It stops just short of the walls. It's as if it's suspended in midair. Rashi says there's a little reed or something that was stuck in the ground in the center of the open end of the mavoi to hold it up so it doesn't fall, but it doesn't reach the walls. And meshucha, the Gemara is assuming, means that it's put in front of the opening. It's not directly in the opening, it's suspended across the front, which is exactly Rava's case. And what is the halacha in these two karas that are either not reaching the walls or in front of the walls? So the Gemara says, the Brisa says that halacha is that as long as it's within, it reaches to close enough to the walls to be considered lavud, to be considered halachically attached, connected, it's okay. But if it's not considered halachically attached, it's no good. Now that depends on how close you have to be to count as lavud. And that's a machlokes. According to the Rabbanan, it has to be within 3 tvachim to be lavud. According to Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, lavud is 4 tvachim. But lavud is a halachic concept that says even though there's a small gap, we consider it to be fully closed. It's halacha l'masha misinai, as we've seen before. And but what we need from this is that if it's too far away to be considered lavud, then it doesn't count. If, however, it is within a sheer lavud, it's okay, even if it's put on the front of the wall. So in Rava's case, where the beam is actually attached to the front of the walls, and it goes right across, there shouldn't be a problem. Who says it has to go directly over the top? Here we have a clear indication that it doesn't have to go directly over the top. So the Gemara's answer is to say you misunderstood the case. When it says meshucha, it doesn't mean that it's not in the opening of the mavoi and that it's in the front. It's not what it means. Meshucha means that it touches the walls. It touches only one wall, and it doesn't reach all the way to the other wall. Teluya means it doesn't reach either wall. Meshucha means it touches one wall and not the other wall. And we need to say both of these because if you would have only told me that I say lavud when it's only missing on one side, I wouldn't know that you would still say lavud when it's missing on both sides. That's why I have to tell me on one side there's lavud, and even on both sides you say lavud as well. That's the Gemara's first answer to explain why this doesn't contradict Rava. Now Rashi has another answer, and he says here we're talking about a different case completely. We're talking about a case where the crossbeam is both higher than the walls and not long enough to reach the two walls. How does that work? So the Gemara says you took two thin reeds that are too thin to count as a crossbeam themselves. They don't meet the minimum width, which is a tefach wide. Two thin beams, and you angled them coming out of the top corners of the mavoi, meaning the walls that form the front corners of the mavoi, and you took two reeds and you angled them so that they reached this beam, which is not long enough to extend all the way across the mavoi and it's too high. So by these reeds, you were able to close the gap. Now, some machlokas are showing if these reeds are angled or if the reeds are actually bent in the shape of a reish so that they hold it up. Either way, the reeds themselves don't count as a chayra. It only works if the beam itself is considered to be close enough to be lavud. So you have the case of Tuluya is where it's not too high. The case of Tuluya and Meshucha is where it is too high and it's too short. And the chiddush is that not only do we say lavud, we even at the same time say a rule called chavot. Chavot is similar to lavud, except instead of saying that you close the gap if it's less than 3 tvachim, we say we view the beam as if it's lower. We can halachically lower it. And view it, halachah mashbisina again, and view it as if it's lower. And therefore, if it's less than 3 tvachim above the height of the top of the walls, I can halachically say that it's lowered. And I can also say that if it's within 3 tvachim of reaching the sides of the walls, that it's extended all the way to the sides. And again, the chiddush is that I could say both of those halachas at the same time. The Gemara now begins the topic of the daf, which is the subject of carrying next to the lechi itself, or the beam itself, which mark off the entrance to the mavoi to make it permitted to carry within it. Next to the beam, the lechi itself, or under the beam itself, are you allowed to carry? Gemara introduces the subject with a brisa that is brought by Rabbi Zakkai. So he brings the brisa and he set it over in front of Rabbi Yochanan. The brisa says that under the beam or next to the lechi counts as a carmelis. You're not allowed to carry there. So Abaye said. Rabbi Yochanan responded. He said, "This brisa is a mistake. Go out of the base medrash with it. Don't teach it in here. It's not true. You are allowed to carry." So the Gemara now has a machlokes between Abaye and Rava. Had on said Rabbi Yochanan, and proofs either way will be the balance of this discussion. Abaye said when Rabbi Yochanan said that you are allowed to carry, he must mean under the beam. But next to the lechi, everybody agrees you're not allowed to carry. He wouldn't say that. And Rava said, no, you are allowed to carry next to the lechi. So we have a machlokes between Abaye and Rava. Are you allowed to carry next to the lechi, which you use to mark off the entrance to the mavoi, according to Rabbi Yochanan? Now the difference between the lechi and the kaira, the beam, we learned on Daf Ches, the beam has a minimum size of 1 tefach wide, and therefore there is space under it. The lechi does not, and therefore it could be a more serious problem. If you let people carry near it, they'll end up carrying further than it. So let's see the proofs that we bring. So Rava says, my proof, my source, is from a statement of Rav Dimi named Rav Yochanan, who said that if you have a low pillar of sorts, that's less, its surface is less than 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim wide, and it is situated on a border between Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah. So that surface itself is called a makam patur. It's not significant enough to be Rosh Hashanah. It's not wide enough, and it's not Rosh Hashanah because nobody walks on it. So it's a makam patur, and therefore you're allowed to put things onto it, both from Rosh Hashanah and from Rosh Hashanah. You're just not allowed to go across. You can't go from Rosh Hashanah onto the makam patur and then onto Rosh Hashanah, because then people will end up carrying straight from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah or vice versa. But to go onto the makam patur is not a problem. So you see that a zone which is intermediate between Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah is allowed to be used by both rishuyos. So the space of next to the lechi is the same thing. It is a zone which is on the border between Rosh Hashanah and the inside of the mavoi, which is Rosh Hashanah, and therefore both rishuyos should be allowed to use it, and you should be allowed to carry within it. Abaye answers. He says that's no proof. That is clearly significantly different. It is a pillar on the floor. It is, you can see, it's at least 3 tvachim high. In the case of the space next to a beam, there's nothing significant to show you anything there, and therefore people end up getting confused and carrying straight through if you allow them to do that. Abaye now says, what's my source? My source from a statement of Rav Chama bar Gir in the name of Rav, talking about a case where a mavoi's entrance has kind of like a door frame. The walls stick out towards the center of the entrance to the mavoi, and it forms almost like a frame. And those walls, that frame, is a little bit wide. So Rav said that you need another lechi. That those walls don't count as a lechi. You need another one in order to be able to carry inside the door frame itself. Now, why would you not be able to carry inside the door frame itself? Obviously, the reason is because you can't carry next to the lechi. And I am right. Maybe you'll tell me, he says, that no, here the situation is where the width of that frame was actually 4 tvachim, and the halacha is that the minimum size of a mavoi is 4 tvachim. So this frame itself counts as a mini mavoi. That's why it needs a lechi. It's a mavoi itself. It can't be a lechi if it is a mavoi. So Gemara says that can't be because we have another statement of Rav Hanan by Rava, the name of Rav, who says that this situation here is not talking about where it's 4 tfachim wide. Okay, so that's not the reason. The reason must be like I'm saying, because you can't carry next to the lechi itself, you can only carry further in. If you want to be able to carry here next to this doorpost, you got to put another lechi at the beginning of it, so then that way you're not carrying next to the lechi, you're carrying the entire frame doesn't become a lechi, and you're not carrying next to a lechi itself. Now, how does Rava answer this? Rava says this is talking about a different scenario here than I'm talking about. I was talking about where there's a Rishus Harabim running past the entrance to the Mavoi. This is talking about where there is a Carmelis running past the entrance to the Mavoi. So the Gemara says, well, Carmelis is easier, it should be better. It's less of an isser. Rava says no, because the problem is that the space between the lechi is technically Carmelis itself. When you have a Carmelis running outside, the two Carmelis connect, and it becomes just like the Carmelis that's outside, and therefore it's forbidden. If you have a Shus Harabim outside, and the space next to the lechi is a Carmelis, they don't connect, and therefore you're allowed to carry within there. And now the Gemara has a kasha on Rava. It's asked by Rav Huna Breder of Yeshua, and he's quoting a statement of Rabbi Chana on the name of Rabbi Yochanan again. And the case is a funny situation here. You have a mavoi, and along one wall of the mavoi, you have a number of lechis placed along the wall. So the lechis are placed in such a way that it's a machlokes whether it's loved or not. It's, let's say it's 3.5 tfachim. So according to Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, it's not loved yet. You need, according to Shimon ben Gamliel, it is loved because it's less than 4 tvachim, and according to the Chachamim, it's not loved because there are more than 3 tvachim there. So now, what is the halacha then? So he says, well, it depends. If you hold that it's loved, so then it's one long wall, so then you're not allowed to carry next to all these lechis. If, however, you hold that it is not lavud, so then you are allowed to carry next to these lechis. Obviously, the reason is that according to Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, it's all viewed as one long lechi, and you can't carry next to the lechi. According to the Rabbanan, it's not viewed as one long lechi. Only the outside lechi is actually doing the job of making the mavi permitted to carry within. The rest are just stop hanging around over there. And therefore, as soon as you get past the first lechi, it's not all called lechi anymore, and you're allowed to carry there. So Gemara says 2 answers. First of all, Rava says again, this is talking about where there's a Carmelis running past the entrance to the Mavoi, not Rosh Hashanah, and like we said before, it connects. Carmelis connects to Carmelis, and therefore it's forbidden. If it's Rosh Hashanah, it wouldn't connect and it wouldn't be forbidden. And I'm telling you, you're allowed to carry there only when it's Rosh Hashanah running by. Second answer is Rav Ashi says you got this whole machlekes wrong over here. When we say that this depends on the machlekes between Shimon and Gamliel and the Chachamim, we're not talking about what you think. The issue is that according to Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, it's all one long wall, and therefore it's more than 4 tfachim long. Actually, the Gemara says it's even more than 4 amos long, and therefore it counts as a mavoi itself. It counts as a mini mavoi. These lechis together all connect to each other halachically. They all count as a solid wall, and you can't have a lechi that's more than 4 amos long. It counts as a mavoi. Counts as a mavoi wall. Therefore, you need another lechi besides, and that's why you can't carry next to those lechis. However, according to the Rabbanan, they don't connect because they're too far apart to be lavud, and therefore you only have one small stick. The outer lechi is the lechi, and you're allowed to carry there, but this has absolutely nothing to do with the issue of carrying next to the lechi or not carrying next to the lechi. The issue over here, that has nothing to do with this. Over here, the problem is that it becomes a mavoi wall. The Gemara now asks a question which launches us into our next subject. The Gemara asks, according to Shimon ben Gamliel, you're saying I can't carry there because it's a mavoi wall, but the outer lechi probably sticks out of the mavoi, which means that if you're standing outside the mavoi in Rosh Hashanah and you look, you'll see it sticking out. So you'll see a piece of lechi there. You only don't see a lechi if you're on the inside. If you're on the inside of the mavoi, it looks like a long wall. So this is what we call a lechi which is visible from the outside or not from the inside. And we know that the halacha is that counts as a lechi, so it should be okay. The Gemara answers is that we're in Rav Yochanan's opinion, who says that in such a case, it does not count as a lechi, and therefore it's no good. Okay, now the Gemara gets into this machlokes much more deeply. What happens when you have a lechi which is visible from the inside but not from the outside, or visible from the outside and not from the inside? How does this work? The situation is where the lechi is built in such a way that it's flush from one perspective and you don't see anything sticking out, but it's not flush from the other perspective and you do see it. So visible from the inside and not from the outside means that the lechi was situated just inside the entrance to the mavoi. So that if you're standing on the street, on the Rosh Hashanah outside the mavoi and looking at it, you won't necessarily see it. It's not sticking out of the plane formed by the entrance to the mavoi. Now, from the inside you'll see it because it is sticking out. If you're standing against the wall of the mavoi looking towards Rosh Hashanah, you'll see it. It's sticking into the entrance right there. So this is visible from the inside and not from the outside. A situation like that, everybody agrees, counts as a lechi. That's a good lechi. Question is, what happens when it's the other way around? It's put just outside the edge of the wall of the mavoi, and it's flush with the wall. That way, if you're standing inside the mavoi, you won't see it. It doesn't stick into your line of sight. If you're standing in Rosh Hashanah, you will see it. It sticks into Rosh Hashanah. That's called visible from the outside, but not from the inside. That's a machlekes between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi and Rabbi Chia. And the Gemara says we don't have record of who holds that is a lechi, who holds that it's not. We're going to try to prove to you that Rabbi Chia is the one who says that it is a lechi because he has a similar brisa that he quotes. He quotes a brisa about where the wall itself is uneven. And one part of the wall of the mavoi, one section of it is wider than the other, and he says, well, it depends where the wider part is. If the wider part is at the end, so that the people who are in Rosh Hashanah do not see that it's wider, they don't see that it gets narrower or deeper in, it still counts as a good lechi. And even if the narrower part is on the outside and the wider part is inside, so that the people on the outside can see that it's a lechi and not the people that are inside, it's also a good lechi. So you see that Rav Chia holds is that either way it's good, whether it's visible only from the outside or only from the inside, it's good either way. The Gemara says, okay, I'll accept that proof. He's the one who says that it's good either way. But the Gemara says, hold on a second, he brought a brisa. And just before you told me that Rabbi Yochanan holds that if it's only visible from the outside, it doesn't count. What could he do with this brisa? So the Gemara says, interestingly, Rabbi Yochanan knew about the brisa, but he held that it was a mistake, that it was wrong. Rabbi Chia's brisas don't always necessarily count as halacha. So the Gemara says, well, hold on a second. If he knew about the brisa, and he held that it's wrong, so then maybe Rabbi Chia also held that it's wrong. Just because, how do you know that he held that it's right? Maybe Rabbi Chia did not agree with it halachically, and he's not the one who really holds the way. So the Gemara says, no. Rabbi Yochanan didn't quote it. That's why we're assuming he held that it's wrong. Rabbi Chia quoted it. If he taught it to his Talmidim, obviously he held that it's a correct brisa, and that is what he holds. Marna asks a kasha, which should prove that if it's only visible from the outside, it doesn't count. But it's not talking about a case of Movi, it's talking about two courtyards, two chatzeros, which are connected to each other. They share a wall. So one is wider than the other at the shared wall. And now what happened is the shared part of that wall fell down. So these two chatzeros now form like a T. One is wider than the other one, and the shared space fell down. And the Gemara has a quote here that this case, the halacha is that the larger chutzner you're still allowed to carry within, because in that chutzner the entire wall didn't fall down. The part which collapsed is only the shared part, but this one has bits of walls that extend further to the sides of the part that fell down, and therefore we view the part that fell down as a doorway that opened as long as it's 10 amos or less. But if you're in the smaller chutzner, your entire wall fell down, and now you're exposed to the other chutzner, and you can't carry into that chutzner because there's no Erev Chatzeris. And we know that the rule is anytime one region is open to another region that you can't carry into, you can't carry even within the first region. So therefore you can't carry in that chutzner at all. So Gemara says, but hold on a second. If you're standing on the outside of the small chutzner, meaning you're standing in the big chutzner, you do see the walls. You do see that it's not a whole side that fell down, it's just a doorway that opened. So this is our case. It's the same case where it's visible from the outside, it's not visible from the inside. How come we don't accept that as being good enough? We say if you're standing in the small chutzner, it looks like the whole wall fell down. But you can see from the outside. So why isn't that enough of a proof? So Gemara says the case here is where the walls of the small chutzner extend into the large chutzner. They go past the shared wall that now fell down. They go deeper in. And therefore the walls that extend to the sides of the small chutzner as part of the large chutzner, which are meant to show you that the wall that fell wasn't the whole side, that's not visible anymore, because you have perpendicular walls blocking your sight over there. If you have the image in your head, it's like a T that's made in a relief, so you only have the frame of the T all the way around, and the leg of the T, the two sides of the leg of the T, extend into the roof. So now you can't stand in the roof of the T and look towards the leg and say, well, I still see the sides. You don't see the sides because the walls of the leg of the T itself extends into the roof, and therefore that blocks this off. So the Gemara says, well, hold on a second. Those two extensions, where you're extending the walls of the leg of the T, are now parallel to the side walls of the big kotzer, the side walls of the roof of the T. And it's probably a very small space there. So let's say lavud, and mesh those two combined walls into one, and then it's like it disappears, and then it's gone, and halachically you don't have to worry about it. I can go back to my original question. It should be permitted because the side walls that form the bottom of the roof of the T along the sides, that's okay. So Gemara says, well, how do you know that the space between those parallel walls is small enough to say lavud? This is because I have a quote here. I have a quote that the entire discussion over here is where the small chutzner was 10 amos wide and the big chutzner was 11 amos wide. So there's only a difference of 1 amma. That means that on each end it's half an amma. Half an amma is 3 tvachim. 3 tvachim is lavud according to all opinions. So you see that there is lavud. I could view it as connected. So the Gemara says no, it's half an amma, and it's 2 ammas on one end and 4 ammas on the other end. So on the 4 amma end you don't have lavud, and therefore it doesn't connect. So the Gemara says, okay, but I have lavud on one end, I have lavud on one end, and that should be enough. I should view it as one large chutzner on one end. So the Gemara says the answer is we're holding like Rebbe's opinion that you need to have both sides. You have to have a piece of wall on both sides to make it look like a doorway. It's not enough to have it just on one side.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.